So can we all admit that Babyface is probably the creepiest stand we have probably ever seen since the introduction of stands? Like, I'm not talking about stuff that happened later on, like, part 6, part 7, etc., etc. I'm just talking about what we've seen thus far, from part 3 onward, for, like, part 5 now. You have to admit that Babyface is probably the creepiest stand, because when you think about how its usage is, or how it has to be used, it's creepy. It's definitely different from what we're normally used to when it comes to, stand powers. So, let's get right into it. Let's talk about Babyface the stand, and why it's just so creepy / terrifying. So, when you think about how it works, basically, Melon, or Maloney, he is someone that has to use his laptop, which is actually a stand, Babyface, and he puts information inside of it. He has to put, like, their blood type, their gender, just overall get their personality, their horoscope, and all of that. He has to get all the relative information on the person before he can really create, a remote stand, which is Babyface's, I guess, child in a way. But here's the point, though. Basically, after he gets all this information, he impregnates the mother, the woman, to have the child, which is Babyface, and it's creepy, because in a lot of ways, when you watch this episode, you're like, this reminds me a lot of something you would see in maybe Aliens, because, like, in Aliens, you have the face huggers that attach to, like, any person, and then eventually the alien spawns outside of the host, and that's kind of what it looks like here. Even though it wasn't as graphic / brutal, it still reminds you of something of, like, Alien or something, putting, like, this monster inside of a person against their will, and eventually it comes out of their body, and it will kill its host. And that's what happened in this episode. So the entire concept of just how Babyface comes about is creepy. It's definitely something different that we have not seen from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and when you really think about the power of Babyface, it's actually insane. So let's talk about it. The reason what makes Babyface so powerful is because it's a type of stand that can adapt to its opponent. For instance, depending on how it is raised, depending on its mother, depending on the personality of the mother, all these different little factors thrown in will determine how strong Babyface really is. In this case, thanks to the mother being so hot-headed and the baby learning at an alarming rate, and even though it was faster than it should have been, like in terms of, trying to grow up and trying to go after Bruno and his group, even then, it showed that Babyface is an incredible stand, but it really depends on how Melon, or Maloney, uses, the stand power, how he, gives proper information, teaching it what to do or what emotions it needs to have. And I mean, when you really think about it, Babyface is a stand. It could be a really crazy stand power on the side of good. For instance, if Maloney was, like, let's say, a good person, okay, hypothetically, this is just hypothetical. If we can get past how he has to technically impregnate a woman, basically, to have the stand come about, besides that factor, honestly, he could be a really interesting good guy. Because imagine having a stand have its own personality that's, like, in physical form where everybody can see it, and it matures alongside of people and grows up. It would be a very fascinating way to do something different with a stand. And I wonder later on down the road, like, in part 6, 7, 8, whatever, if Araki ever experiments with that. Like a stand potentially staying around, having its own personality, and never really disappearing. It'd be a really cool thing for Araki to really dive into, because, I mean, it really opens up a door. A door that's really not been touched before in JoJo, because, like I said, this stand was maturing and growing, which it did grow at an alarming rate, but imagine if it was around for a long time, a period of years. Like, how crazy that stand would be, because it can learn. It can, learn new concepts of fighting its opponents and stuff. It literally is like a living being separate from its actual stand user. So, it's crazy to think about. But anyways, let's get into the actual episode. So, Babyface's power. From what we can see, besides just, being able to get inside of a host and eventually form its own, like, new version of itself and then hunt down its target, aka Bruno, Babyface's overall ability is able to turn people living objects into non-living objects. For instance, let's say like a chair, a table, etc., etc., ground. It turns people into objects that are not living. And it doesn't downright kill you, but it does change your form. And in this case, it is a very strong stand, because it's kind of very similar to Giorno's, stand ability, which he does talk about in this episode, and how their stands are just very similar in terms of how they work. I mean, Giorno, technically, he turns, non-living objects into living objects. He can create different animals and stuff from little, parts, like car parts and stuff, which we saw in this episode, which shows that Giorno's stand is very identical to Babyface. But there is different applications to it. Obviously, there is some distinct differences, but the point still is that Babyface, its power is also to where it could change its shape into non-living objects, like go in between like non-living objects and kind of meld with it and shift through it, which you saw in this episode how it was going through the wall, going through the ground, etc., etc. It's a very powerful stand, and if Giorno honestly wasn't fighting it in this episode, it would have probably been very different. I think everybody else in the group would have probably had a very hard time facing this stand power because of how unique it is and different. I think only Giorno really had the capabilities of being able to fight it. Which, by the way, let's talk about Giorno's upgrade, or what happened in this episode with his stand. So, Giorno learned a little bit about himself in terms of being able to heal pieces of his body. So, as we've already seen before, Giorno is able to turn different things on his body into other things. Like, he's turned something into, like, a jellyfish or whatever to be absorbed the pee that was in his cup that, a couple episodes back, around episode 4 or 5 or whatever. We've seen that, Giorno does have some different, usages for his ability. His stand power is unique. But he learned that he could actually create living pieces, living objects, like, let's say his throat, what happened in this episode, when he had a chunk ripped out and taken by Babyface, he decided to use a, non-living object, turn it into the chunk that was taken out, and then he was able to breathe again and be able to speak. He learned how to create new body parts with non-living objects, which is incredibly OP. It's really, really freaking OP, because that means that Giorno can effectively, let's say if he lost his arm, create an entirely new arm and be completely fine. Or he could do this for others as well if he wants to go that far. So Giorno, he really is an interesting individual in terms of just how his stand works. It's crazy. So I like the little reveal in this episode and how it was dived into by David Productions. I think they did a good job presenting it. And also, by the way, once again, I just have to admit that this adaptation from David Productions for JoJo Part 5 is hella good. Like, honestly, anyone that is complaining about this, I don't know what you're complaining about, because this is truly probably one of the best anime adaptations I've seen for a series in a very long time. Like, this is a really good anime adaptation. I'm not just talking about, animating the content, but it's going above and beyond just to make this so much better than it was. The pacing and everything, it doesn't feel too long, doesn't feel too short. Just the dialogue, everything about this adaptation is just freaking amazing. So, what is there to really talk about? Let's see here. I guess let's talk about, that ending finale of the episode, that cliffhanger. So, Giorno had a piranha literally going through Babyface's body, and then at the end, it comes out of his body, and, the episode ends. And you're like, wow, what a freaking cliffhanger. It makes you wonder, is Babyface dead? Is Babyface going to be able to get out of this? Honestly, when you really look at the situation, Babyface most likely is dead, or pretty much close to being dead. However, you do have to remember that Babyface is a remote stand, so it will not have any effect on Melon, and, hurt him at all. Because, once again, long-distance stands like that don't go back to the user, so any damage that Giorno does against a remote stand user won't affect him. So that is the reason why, Maloney is completely fine in this episode. And so if Babyface is defeated, it's not really going to stop the main stand user. However, you also need to remember, because of how Babyface works as a stand, he could create another copy like that. He can just create another one, and, that's it. He has endless amount of stands he can constantly pump out to fight Giorno that can learn, get very strong. It just really depends on the host, the mother of the stand, that really determines how skilled it will be. So yeah, I think this is a pretty high quality episode. I enjoyed it from start to finish. I think, once again, that, You know, even though this was a very weird part when I read it in the manga, I think that David Productions has made this a little bit creepier than the manga, but they made it, you know, just so much better. I don't know, just the way they present, you know, the colors to just the color palette of the episodes and stuff, they just do a fantastic job. But I love you guys. You have a wonderful day or night wherever you live. If you enjoy my content, you know, please subscribe. If you like this video, please leave a like. And if you want to get notified for whenever I upload a video, please click the bell icon down below. And with that, Chibi out.